The old map warned of only one thing. If the shrine opens before sunrise, do not look behind you. I thought it was another village legend, until the morning I heard footsteps following me through the forest. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped. Every time I walked, they returned. When I finally gathered the courage to look behind me, there was nobody there. Only a trail of wet footprints leading straight toward me. The following morning, before the first rooster crowed, I left the village. Grandmother stood silently outside her hut. She didn't try to stop me. Instead, she placed a small leather pouch around my neck. Inside it was a tiny carved white stone. "The first elders carried this," she whispered. "It won't protect you. It will only help you remember who you are." Those words made no sense. Not then. The forest north of Njaba River was unlike any place I had ever seen. The trees grew so close together that sunlight barely touched the ground. Strange vines twisted around ancient trunks. Birds sang, then suddenly stopped. Even the wind refused to enter. Hours passed. The deeper I walked, the quieter the forest became. Then I found the first marker. A weathered stone carved with symbols identical to those on grandmother's map. Someone had been here before me. Recently, fresh footprints surrounded the stone, bare feet, still wet. I wasn't alone. I continued deeper into the jungle. Soon, I noticed something impossible. The same tree appeared again and again. Its twisted roots, its broken branch, even the deep claw marks on its bark. I was walking in circles. The forest didn't want me to leave. Panic slowly crept into my chest. Then I remembered grandmother's advice. When you're lost, listen to the river. At first, I heard nothing. Then, very faintly, water flowing. I followed the sound. The forest slowly released me. As sunset approached, the forgotten shrine finally appeared, hidden beneath enormous cliffs covered in hanging vines. Its entrance was cracked with age. Ancient carvings covered every wall. They weren't decorations, they were warnings. Every carving showed people kneeling before the river, offering something precious. Children, warriors, kings, entire families. I felt sick. The stories had been true. At the center of the shrine stood a massive stone altar. Above it floated hundreds of tiny blue lights, like stars trapped inside the temple. The air felt heavy, almost alive. Then I noticed something resting on the altar. An old wooden mask, covered with dried river mud. As I stepped closer, the blue lights began circling around me, slowly, like they were studying me. Then every light rushed into the mask. Its empty eyes opened, not with fire, with water. Crystal clear water poured endlessly from its eyes. A deep voice echoed through the shrine. "You carry the blood of the first promise." My legs nearly gave way. The voice continued. "You have returned." I shouted into the darkness. "Who are you?" Then the stone floor trembled beneath my feet. The altar slowly slid aside. A hidden staircase appeared, leading deep beneath the shrine. Cold air rose from below, carrying the familiar smell of Njaba River. There was only one place it could lead, under the river itself. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I lit my lantern and descended. The deeper I walked, the older the walls became. Ancient paintings covered the stone. They showed the first villagers standing beside the mysterious woman in white. But something was different. She wasn't demanding sacrifices. She was crying. The villagers were the ones kneeling, begging her to save them. Then another painting revealed the truth. One greedy elder secretly changed the agreement. Instead of offering gratitude, he offered human lives. The promise had been corrupted. The curse was never created by the river. It was created by man. Suddenly, the tunnel shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Water began flowing through the cracks. Someone else was inside the shrine. Heavy footsteps echoed below. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I lifted my lantern. The darkness answered, not with words, with breathing. Deep, slow, ancient. Then, two glowing blue eyes opened in the darkness, far larger than any human, far larger than any animal. Whatever lived beneath the shrine had been waiting for me. The lantern flame flickered wildly. The massive creature took one slow step forward. The ground trembled beneath its weight. I could finally see part of its body. Its skin looked like black stone covered in flowing water. Ancient symbols glowed across its chest. It wasn't attacking. It was watching, judging. Then it spoke my name, not with a voice, inside my mind. Chisom. I couldn't move. It lowered its enormous head, then showed me something impossible. Behind the creature, hundreds of transparent figures stood silently, every missing villager, including Obina. None of them looked afraid. They were waiting, as if this guardian alone stood between them and freedom. The lantern flame flickered wildly. One final thought echoed inside my head. Break the false promise or become its next guardian. The lantern went out. Complete darkness swallowed everything. And somewhere beneath the river, something enormous began to wake up. The moment Chisom's lantern went out, every spirit in the underground chamber disappeared. The blue lights vanished. The ancient symbols stopped glowing. And for several seconds, there was nothing. No footsteps, no water, no wind, only darkness. Then, the ancient guardian spoke. Chisom. His voice seemed to come from the walls, the river, and the ground beneath his feet. Your family began this. Chisom froze. My family? The guardian slowly raised one enormous hand. The carved white stone hanging around Chisom's neck suddenly became warm. Then it began to glow. A thin white light spread across the darkness. And suddenly, Chisom saw a vision. He saw Njaba River many generations earlier. The river was beautiful, clear, peaceful. Children played along its banks. Farmers collected water from it. Women washed clothes beside the river. And standing among them was the woman in white. She wasn't frightening. She was protecting the people. The river had been a gift, a sacred promise between the people and the spirit who guarded the water. But then, one man became greedy. He was the village elder who had discovered that the river contained something valuable, gold. He wanted it for himself. The woman in white warned him, "Take only what you need." But the elder refused. He wanted everything. So he created a new agreement, a false promise. He told the villagers that the river demanded human lives in exchange for its protection. And the villagers believed him. One by one, innocent people were sacrificed. The woman in white watched helplessly. She had never demanded their lives. The elder had lied. And every life taken made the river darker, until the sacred promise became a curse. Chisom watched the vision with tears in his eyes. Then he recognized the elder. The face was familiar. It was the same face he had seen in an old family photograph. His ancestor.
My family did this? The guardian nodded. And your family was given one final chance to correct it. Chisom looked down at the white stone. What must I do? The guardian pointed toward the deepest part of the underground chamber. A narrow passage opened. Beyond it was a pool of perfectly still water. At its center stood an ancient stone bowl. The guardian spoke again. Return what was stolen. Chisom stepped toward the pool. As he approached, the water began to glow. Then he saw something beneath its surface. Hundreds of small lights. Each one represented a person whose life was taken because of the false promise. They were waiting, not for revenge, for release. Chisom reached into his leather pouch. He removed the carved white stone. The moment he held it above the water, the entire underground chamber began shaking. The river above them roared. Water poured through cracks in the ceiling. The spirits appeared again. This time, they weren't standing behind the guardian. They were surrounding Chisom. Then, Obinna stepped forward. Chisom stared at him. Obinna. Obinna smiled. For the first time, he looked completely at peace. You came back. Chisom's voice trembled. I came to bring you home. Obinna shook his head. You cannot bring us home. He looked toward the glowing water. You can only set us free. Chisom placed the white stone into the ancient bowl. Nothing happened. He waited. The chamber remained silent. Then he remembered grandmother's words. It won't protect you. It will only help you remember who you are. Chisom finally understood. The stone wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a protection charm. It was a symbol of the original promise. He stepped into the water. Cold water reached his ankles, then his knees, then his waist. The spirits began glowing brighter. The guardian watched silently. Chisom closed his eyes and spoke. The river never demanded your blood. The river was betrayed by those who wanted more than they needed. The blue lights began rising. The false promise ends with me. Suddenly, the white stone shattered. A brilliant wave of light exploded across the underground chamber. The water rose into the air. The ancient carvings on the walls began changing. The images of sacrifice disappeared. The villagers in the mural stood up. The chains around them vanished. And one by one, the spirits began to disappear into the light. The guardian slowly turned toward the woman in white. She had appeared at the opposite side of the chamber. Her long black hair floated gently around her. Her white gown moved as though she were standing underwater. But her face was no longer frightening. She looked tired and finally free. She looked at Chisom. The promise has been restored. Chisom lowered his head. What happens now? The woman in white smiled. Now the river remembers what it was meant to be. Then she looked toward the guardian. The enormous being began breaking apart. Not violently, its stone body slowly transformed into thousands of glowing blue particles. The water flowing across its body became light. Its glowing eyes softened, and before disappearing completely, it looked at Chisom. You are not the next guardian. You are the last witness. Then it vanished. Silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. The underground chamber stopped shaking. The water became still. The ancient shrine began filling with warm golden light. Chisom climbed out of the pool. He looked around. There were no spirits, no guardian, no glowing symbols, only ancient stones and the sound of flowing water. He walked toward the exit. For the first time, the tunnel no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a doorway. When Chisom finally emerged from the shrine, the sun was rising. Golden morning light spread across the rainforest. Birds were singing again. The wind had returned. And Njaba River looked different. The water was crystal clear. The strange darkness that had surrounded it for generations was gone. Chisom stood beside the river and watched the current flow peacefully. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Grandmother was standing on the riverbank. She had tears in her eyes. Chisom ran toward her. She held him tightly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chisom whispered, "Grandmother." She pulled away and looked at him. "You saw them?" Chisom nodded. "The people who were taken. And the guardian? He's gone." Grandmother closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Then it's finally over." That evening, the entire village gathered beside Njaba River. For the first time in generations, nobody was afraid to go near the water. Children played along the riverbank. Women collected water. Farmers washed their hands in the clear current. And the elders gathered under the old trees. Grandmother stepped forward. She told them the truth. The river had never been their enemy. The curse had been born from greed, from lies, from a promise that had been twisted by one man's desire for wealth. The village remained silent. Then the oldest elder stood. He looked at the river and whispered,
"We remember." Everyone repeated the words, "We remember." That night, Chisom returned home. He placed the empty leather pouch beside his bed. The carved white stone was gone. For the first time in generations, the pouch felt completely empty. Chisom smiled. He lay down and closed his eyes. But just before sleep took him, he heard something, water, very faintly, flowing beside his window. Chisom opened his eyes. The room was dark. He sat up and listened. Nothing. He smiled and lay back down. Then a woman's voice whispered from somewhere outside, "Thank you." Chisom sat upright. His heart raced. He rushed to the window, but there was nobody there. Only the moon shining over Njaba River, and on the surface of the water, a single white flower floated gently downstream. Years later, the villagers would tell the story of Njaba River differently. They would no longer speak of a cursed river. They would speak of a sacred river that had survived the greed of men. They would tell their children about the spirits who finally found peace. They would tell them about the guardian beneath the water, and they would tell them about Chisom, the man who entered the forgotten shrine and returned with the truth. But there was one thing they never explained. Every year, on the same night the ancient promise was restored, a woman dressed in white could be seen standing beside Njaba River. She never spoke. She never harmed anyone. She simply watched the water. And whenever a traveler came too close to the river after midnight, she would slowly turn toward them, as if asking one question: "What are you willing to give?" And perhaps that was the real lesson of Njaba River. The river never asked for blood. It only asked for respect.
because water can give life. But when greed turns a blessing into a possession, even the most beautiful river can remember.